good morning, everybody. I hope you've got your coffee ready and your tea. We are going to go through, over the next sort of half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, the Performance Through Procurement programme, and specifically how you can use it effectively to upskill your teams. So my name is Helen Carter, for those of you who don't know me, although I can see some familiar friends on there. I have been with the supply chain school since the beginning, and actually sustainability even longer. Procurement is my background, as you probably know, more recently sustainable procurement, but it's all still procurement, and specifically recently on modern slavery and human rights, so supply chain transparency, those sorts of elements. I have, alongside my wonderful colleague Mel, been working on this programme now for two years. It seems so much longer sometimes, and the purpose of the programme is really about how we start to improve the procurement skills within our industry and within construction. So a lot of the material that I'm going to go through today produced not just by myself and Mel and Sean, but also in partnership with organisations like SIPS and King's College, and also with the partners of the school as well. So we've really tried to trawl as much best practice as we can, and obviously made sure that we really do give a good insight into procurement going forward as well. So in terms of today's session, it's a webinar, so you know the way it goes. So it will be turned off, microphones are off at the moment. If you have any questions, there's both the chat box and the Q&A. I have them open on my screen, so please feel free to drop anything into the chat or anything into the Q&A, and I will address those as we go through. Excuse me, we are going to use Mentimeter, so if you've got that app on your phone, open that up now and I'll give you the code when we come to use it. We've got it in 2 elements of the session this morning, and as always we will distribute the slides after we have finished, so please feel free to make sure that you get your welcome or also thank you email and get the slides accordingly. We are recording this, so the webinar will be available as well online, as we always do. So if you miss any of it, you can get access to the recording afterwards, and hopefully maybe circulate it around if you find it interesting. So what are we going to cover? Well, basically what we're looking to do today is really get you thinking about your upskilling requirements in your business. So why are we focusing specifically on procurement? Me personally, because I'm passionate about it and I think everybody should do it a lot better, but actually procurement is so important at the moment. If it was never important before, it is now. So we need to make sure that we are understanding why procurement is so key to how we run our projects. And we're also going to have a look at who this programme is aimed at and probably give you a few surprises. So we'll look specifically at how it could be used and who it's aimed at in that area. We'll also look at the key materials that are in there, so we'll go through things like the training needs analysis. We'll give you a bit more insight into all the workshops, and then hopefully give you a bit of inspiration to think about how you can then develop your own learning journey. The idea behind this is to get you to think about how you can use all this resource to upskill all your teams, upskill yourselves within this space, and really try and get a smarter approach to procurement, or an improved approach to procurement, even if you're doing it really well. And then we'll have a Q&A session at the end, as we always do. So before we sort of go through the programme, one of the things I always found in my earlier days of procurement, when I used to work out on sites and when I used to work in construction, was one of the best things we could get our directors to do and our senior teams to do was talk about what procurement actually is. If people really understand procurement, then we understand why it's so important. So things are changing, the world is changing in a way that I don't think any of us have ever really thought could be possible in our lifetimes. And procurement now has become a really hot topic. And for our industry alone, there's a big challenge here in terms of the fact that whether we like it or not, we have such a reliance on the procurement process. I'm not saying necessarily the procurement teams, but the procurement process, because such a lot of what we do is delivered by a supply chain. And over the last few years, we've really started to see those supply chains creak. Around about 80%, I've seen figures as high as 90% of our programs are delivered by a supply chain. So it's kind of ironic that a lot of the clients that I work with in the consultancy side, and probably even some in the school, are trying to deliver procurement activity with a very small team, trying to really not understand the process, or don't really understand the processes necessary to really get the best out of the supply chains going forward. So whether we like it or not, we are dependent on procurement. We're dependent on a supply chain to enable us to deliver all these amazing projects that we can deliver in our industry. But I should imagine you're all a bit tired at the moment if we've got procurement professionals on the call. If we've got people who are using procurement professionals, you may be seeing very tired individuals, because we have come up with some of the biggest challenges, and they don't stop coming at the moment. We've obviously had, sort of 3 years ago, the start of a huge sea change in the way that we do business, with COVID happening, and even today that hasn't gone away. So whilst obviously within the UK rules are relaxing, things are relaxing in Europe, China's just announced it's gone straight back into another huge lockdown, and we're starting to see again some of those challenges that we'd had before around where some of our goods are coming from, where some of our materials are coming from. So it isn't just about understanding what we've got around supply chain capability, but it's also in understanding that we are part of a large global supply chain, and the smallest little stone creates a huge ripple effect. So COVID is better, but it hasn't gone away, and probably won't go away yet again for another few years. If COVID wasn't just a problem, we had Brexit, and at least 3 years, up to 3 years since we've sort of officially left the European Union, we're still struggling with how we understand where goods come from. Still dealing with labour shortages. We're still trying to navigate the way that we have to go through all those different rules and regulations that aren't quite yet fixed. So the huge emphasis of understanding our supply chain, understanding what our suppliers and subcontractors are dealing with, is important. We saw not only problems with material shortages, but we're now starting to feel the crunch around labour shortages as well. So it's really important, again, that we don't just focus on the COVID issue, but the Brexit issue has also started to play a part. Don't need to give you any guesses for what's coming next. But if you can then overlay anything else on top of that, let's throw in conflicts. The huge conflict that we're now seeing across Europe with Ukraine, and the escalation with Russia, is having a massive effect both in our personal lives, with basic food supplies, but actually also looking at particular products in terms of minerals, things like palladium, cobalt, nickel, copper, key components that come from places like Russia, which is the second largest provider in the world behind places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, and are key to a lot of things like our semiconductors, our batteries, things that we are relying on for this big net zero approach that we're looking for. So again, understanding our procurement, understanding our supply chains is a way to be able to navigate all of this. So we're seeing a world that, ironically, we've aimed for globalization, but we're actually starting to see a shrinking world. We're starting to see one where it's getting more difficult to get goods, services, people, products from anywhere across the globe. And actually, it puts a huge pressure on all our organizations to really get to grips with understanding what's going on in our supply chain and get a better understanding from our suppliers. So understanding how to deal with all of this is really, really important, and part of fundamentally the role of the procurement teams and the procurement processes that you are adopting. So it's not just about buying stuff anymore. Procurement isn't just about buying things. Never really was, to be honest, but now we understand that more. It's about delivering increased value, providing a sustainable supply chain solution. It's about resilience and understanding what's going on in our supply chain. It's about innovation. It's about collaboration. And at the end of the day, if we come out of this and there isn't anything else happening, we need to ensure that our businesses and our supply chains are coming out robust and strong to enable us to carry on delivering all the major exciting projects that we're going for. So when we think about procurement and we think about the influence it has on supply chains, it's about eliminating that weakest link. The supply chain is only as strong as that weakest link. So it's important to understand that in order to drive a good, successful business, we need to drive good, successful procurement too. But how do we do that? We train. We train, we provide support, we provide the right tools. We ensure that we dedicate as much time to upskilling procurement users, and I'm not just going to say procurement teams, but procurement users as much as possible. So providing people with the right tools through things like training, through mentoring, through the tools that they use is so essential now. And whilst I appreciate everybody's sitting thinking, Helen, I don't even know where I'm getting my bricks from. Right now, we need to think about how we can actually build the team to get us more resilient to be able to deal with those issues. So what did we do? Well, ironically, when we created this program 3 years ago, 4 years ago, before Brexit, before COVID, before the Ukraine and any of the issues that have raised their head, because we decided that we needed to work on upskilling procurement as much as possible. And there have been other little flags in the UK, I say little, sorry, that's the wrong word, but we start to think about things like Grenfell, the government's transformation in public procurement. The huge focus now is starting to think about how we upskill our procurement processes and our procurement individuals. So this program has been in place for a really long time, and we're just coming to the tail end of it. And it was designed for a number of individuals. So what we want to do is make sure that this program is reaching anybody who's involved in that procurement process. Before I really start to highlight some of those key focus, let's give you a quick picture or get you to think about who undertakes procurement in your process. So if you can go into your Mentimeter app, if you can enter the Mentimeter code 55772122, you will see the question on your screen. And there's 3 questions, and then we'll go back into it later to try the training analysis. I want you to go into the process, into the Menti, and answer the first question. So who undertakes procurement activities in your organisation? So somebody needs to buy something, something needs to work with the supply chain. Who has responsibilities in your organisation? So we've got engineers, we've got commercial teams, we've got the procurement team, obviously. We've got project and construction managers, category managers, buyers, and if there's anybody else I've forgotten, then you can put them under the other. So think about that procurement process. Who's involved in that procurement activity? Okay. So we've got a range of individuals. Interesting. We've got procurement being the strong. We've got a few category managers, which is an ever-evolving trend in our industry as to whether we go through the category management approach. Some of you got the buyers, but you still have procurement teams, which is good. And some of you have recognised the role of project and construction managers, and I'll come back to that again in a moment. Okay, another minute or two. Okay, so the next question is around, okay, so you've got these people, have you undertaken any training? So have you undertaken any procurement training for your teams? None. Yes, you've trained your procurement teams only, or you've actually trained anybody involved in the procurement process. So that includes contract managers, specifiers, people who have interfaces into the procurement process. Okay, so we've got a few saying none. Most have gone, yeah, I train my procurement teams, which is great. But actually it's quite nice to see that figure on the right hand side around people who are involved in the procurement process, not necessarily procurement in the title, actually making sure that they understand their role in procurement as well, which is really good. Okay, last question. Okay, just out of interest, the procurement process that I probably would see most of you saying no, otherwise why are you on this? But have you used any of the materials that we provided through the school? It'd be quite interesting to see that figure as well. Some of you may have dipped in, seen the odd e-learning module, but not really understood the full breadth of what's available. Others might not even know that we do it, which is sort of the purpose of today as well, which is good. Okay, so more no than yes. Okay, for those of you who haven't, we'll make sure you understand everything that we're going to go through today. Okay, so we'll come back to Mentee in a moment. So one of the things that's important, and you've gathered from my emphasis earlier on in the session, is ensuring that when we talk about who we're aiming for through this procurement activity is not just the procurement teams. So when we think about procurement, all the training that we've developed is to look at a procurement process. And the procurement process definition you can see there on your screen, defined by SIPs. But the bit I really want you to look at is the bit at the bottom, sorry. So that's the whole cycle from identification of needs through to end of a service of a contract or the end of the useful life of an asset. So the moment you know you need it to disposal and everything in between. And if you sit and think in your businesses who's involved in that process, you'll actually realise it's pretty much every department. Engineers get involved, designers get involved, contract managers get involved, construction managers get involved. The procurement team themselves have a technical requirement and they are responsible, and I see them as guardians of the supply chain, but fundamentally they're also facilitators, bringing together all those stakeholder needs. And sometimes the biggest problems we have in procurement isn't the knowledge of our procurement professionals, but people outside the procurement function not understanding the impact of some of the things that they do on the procurement process itself. So when we think about procurement and the way that we've developed a lot of the training that we have today, it's about that process, not necessarily about the roles of individuals. So the planning element, what do we do at the very beginning when we know we have a need that we need to deal with? The technical aspect that everybody tends to default very quickly to, which is, okay, go and find the suppliers and award a contract. Then if you don't do the let and forget, which happens way too much, we might do a bit of contract management. And then actually thinking about that end of life gives us massive opportunities to think about how we dispose of assets, how we could actually look at things like circular economy, for example, that allows us to responsibly dispose of things that we're either procuring or getting involved in. So everything we've got that we're going to go through in a moment is designed to look at this procurement process. So if you think about your organisation, anything that we've got in a moment that I'm going to go through could be useful for bid writers, for specifiers, for commercial teams, for engineers, for category managers, for contract managers, for supply chain managers, whoever you have set up. All those individuals at differing levels of seniority are the target audience of what we put together. One of the interesting things, the nuances of the way that construction works, I have put procurement teams and commercial teams side by side because we're part of the same family. So when we talk procurement here, we're not just talking about materials, we are also talking about subcontracts. So it is still a procurement process. It's still about procuring something, delivering value, and putting procurement and commercial in the same pot is really important. Albeit, I know sometimes we don't talk to each other, but fundamentally we are still undertaking the same function, just in slightly different ways. So what does the programme actually have available? So, thank you, I'll come to that comment in a moment. What is performance through the programme? So when we created the programme 3 years ago, and we're coming to our final year, but all the materials will stay there forever. So you'll be able to access these even after the end of the programme. So they have been absorbed into the way that the school operates. We have looked at a huge range of resources. We have looked at ways that people learn through e-learning. We have looked at ways in terms of a resource library. So if you like reading documents, we have workshops. We're running webinars now for the next year. All on various different aspects of procurement and key things that you need to think about. So if you go online, excuse me, to the procurement page, it's broken really nicely into beginners, people who are intermediate, people who are experts, again, allowing you to start to think about how you go through. So if you don't really know very much about procurement, you're an external specifier, you need to understand the processes that you're going through, the beginner piece is really good for you. If you are a procurement manager who has to set up a procurement team, has to think about things like supplier relationship management, then actually the expert bit is really useful for you. So it's set up to be able to meet those elements. Because as we are at the school and it's huge and there is so much information in there, you've got two things you can do. You can either just Google anything you're interested in, so supplier relationship management, performance management, all those sorts of things, or you can then undertake a training needs analysis. So we have a tool that sits within the school that you can access through that procurement page. If you go into the procurement page, it's the second paragraph down. And what that does is allow you to determine either at your personal level or at a corporate level what level of knowledge and understanding you have around procurement as we speak. So if you are a beginner and you really don't know what to do in terms of specifying, for example, or contract management, and it's really important to your role, the training needs analysis gives you some maturity questions that you can actually then answer. And at the end of it, like we do with most things in the school, it will give you a little action plan. And the action plan will have a mixture of e-learning, resources, webinars, things that you can attend that will move your knowledge up to the next level. And then you can reassess again. So it's a really good tool to get you to start thinking about what you know about procurement and what you think you need to know more of. So let's go back to the mentee and give you a couple of questions just to give you a bit of taste for what the question set looks like. There are, I think, around about 15, 16 questions, but I'm just going to give you a close sample of 2 or 3 of them so that you can, excuse me, see exactly what's covered within that. So the way we've done it is that we've broken it down into key things that happens within a procurement process. So the first one you can see here is the business need. And when you are evaluating yourself on the training needs analysis, you can actually put yourself in terms of a positioning statement that says, I don't understand how to evaluate business need for procurement. I understand, and I understand how to select the appropriate route. I understand how to review and challenge those needs. I understand how to define the need and build in whole life costing. I understand to have to look at stimulating and coordinating business needs to foster a culture. So you'll see the maturity level starts to increase. Obviously, if you're a specifier and you're the person at the front who's thinking about that planning, we'd expect you to see you slightly higher up. If you are a procurement person and you need to do that challenging of the need, so you're challenging specifiers, again, we'd expect to see you slightly higher up. Contract manager, maybe not, but that's entirely up to your personal preference. So in here, we've got individuals who don't understand how to evaluate that business need. And again, this is not a you failed, it's right. So we will send you resources and we'll identify resources that you can complete. Okay, so we've got some interesting ones. So let's pick another area then. I'll just do another 2 and then we can go back to the slides. Part of, once you've identified that need, is to develop a strategy and plan. So again, there's questions in here that's talking about how you develop procurement strategies. So my business just reacts to client requirements. I hear that so much in a lot of the training I do and a lot of the clients I work with in the consultancy business. I just do what my client tells me. Others talk about, well, actually, I can understand the value, why we do planning, why we understand those issues. So all the things I was talking about earlier on have to be incorporated into a procurement plan. What's our risks? Where are the issues in the supply chain? Really, really important these days with the due diligence. I understand how to apply different routes to market and forms of contract to drive better business outcomes. I understand how to lead a procurement planning process. I understand the value across the sector using industry benchmarks. So again, we're starting to see that maturity going across. If you are a buyer, you don't necessarily need to be high on this. It might be an area though that if you want to become a procurement manager or a category manager, that you actually do think about upskilling yourself in the space so that you've got the competency to move into that different role. Okay. We've got people who understand the planning process though, that's always a good start. Okay, I'll do one more. Okay, the biggie. If anybody puts they understand value and can define it, can you give me a ring? Because sometimes even I struggle. The value definition, what does value look like? In terms of what we're driving in procurement now, there is still a huge argument that happens, but there is at least a growing understanding that cheapest price is not always best. Excuse me. So how do we drive that extra value? And as money gets tight, value becomes even more important. So in terms of value definition, Some people will say, I don't understand the concept of wider value through procurement. Still debatable subject matter, definitely. But you can look at things like balanced scorecards to help. So some people here have said they're aware of those, which is great. Some people have talked about how they can actually use balanced scorecards to set out that extra value, which is great. There's things like procuring for value toolkits. So we talk a lot about that in the expert area. And actually ultimate value is whole life. So deriving that further in, which is really good. It's not surprising to see so many of you down that I don't understand the value piece. That's one of the biggest areas that we do the training on, that we do get a lot of people asking lots of questions on, which is perfectly fine. And we do have some really good discussions during workshops around what are you trying to achieve through your procurement, not just cheapest price, but what does that value look like? What's the value proposition? How can it be built? Okay, so that's the training needs analysis. So obviously when you do that, you will do that through a tool in the school. And when you completed all of those questions, it will then spit out a little bit of an action plan for you to go away and do. And that's your personal action plan. That's entirely up to you to complete. And once you've completed that, then you can go through and do reassessment. At that action plan, you'll get a huge list, or they'll get 10 aspects from a huge list of resources that we then offer. So there's some great SIPS materials in there, because we've made this program with SIPS. There are e-learning modules, web links, videos, lots of different things. Anything you find interesting is useful to share then amongst your teams as well. What we've done though is we've created a core suite of e-learning modules, and they focus on the key aspects ranging, and what I call this is the elevator approach. So it's sort of starting in at the very rock bottom and then taking you up to that expertise level within the procurement process. So we start off very much with things like introduction to procurement. Does everybody understand what procurement actually is, over what they perceive it to be, and the role that it has to play in successful projects? We've then broken it down into specific categories. So we've got one specifically looking at materials procurement, because that is done differently in slightly different connotations than, say, for example, plant procurement. And although we're looking at traditional procurement issues, we do still bring in some of that value equation. We still bring in some of those considerations around some of the sustainability aspects. But it's important to understand that this is about the foundations of good procurement, that you can then build things like sustainability aspects on top. But we still mention it through the e-learning modules and through the workshops. We then have this elusive thing called subcontract procurement. So how do we make sure that when we build our subcontracts, that we're building in a way that delivers that optimum value? In a strange way, subcontracts have a better opportunity to do that to a certain extent. But how do we do that? How do we get that subcontracting process working properly? And then actually some of those other key aspects we have around things like performance management. So if you work really hard through all that technical aspects of bringing in these great initiatives, defined your value, brought everything that you want in, how do we then make sure that we're monitoring and managing it effectively? And actually probably this and a couple of others that aren't on here are the more strategic approaches, things like collaboration, supplier relationship management, which is becoming a growing area now within construction. How do we make sure that we get closer to some of our suppliers, that we collaborate with them more, that we work with them more? Obviously, those are all small little e-learning modules, so they're really useful to have. You may have some of them through your own action plans. You may decide that if you want to upskill any of your teams, so if you've got any managers on the call, you might decide to actually mandate some of those for your teams to get them to upskill in some of these areas. They're about 30 to 40 minutes, so they really are quite light touch. But then what we've done is we've taken the content and then built on those further. So some of you may or may not have been on some of the workshops that myself and my colleague Mel have run, and we're now having SIPS also support us on the training, because there's a lot of training to be delivered, which is really good news. And they are covering those aspects that we've talked about today. So in the procurement, we look at what procurement is. We understand the business case. How can we articulate what procurement actually is, both to our external stakeholders, to the senior teams, so that people really do understand the purpose of it, and understand what good practice looks like. So what's out there. People will always moan, excuse me, that procurement is always about the cheapest price, and you will get clients that will want that. But there is so much now good practice out there that is looking at driving value, and there's more and more every week, every month, every year. So we will share that with you where we get access to that, because that's what school does really well. Through Plant, we understand again what procurement is. So it is designed that what we're looking to do is try and put you on a journey. So intro is a good place to start, then move to Plant, then move to materials. But we do understand that sometimes people will come and have not done the intro. So we always do a little bit of a refresher, remind you what procurement is. But then we start to go into materials to think about the different types of ways of procuring. So within materials, for example, you could look at things like category management, framework agreements. We start to really dive into some of those mechanics, understand what value could look like when you're procuring materials. So it isn't just about cheapest price, it's thinking about logistics, it's thinking about working with local businesses or small social enterprises. It's about ensuring that you're buying ethically and responsibly, that value bit that you need to be able to add on to that. And really getting people to think about who's involved in that materials procurement, so that again we can look at getting them involved from a stakeholders perspective and drive out best practice. And again, best practice. With workshops, they're always interactive, so you do get an opportunity to speak. It's lovely when you come into our workshops and you put your cameras on. I mean, we don't necessarily like talking to ourselves all the time. So cameras on, safe space, talk to each other about some of the challenges that you're having. And we've run some great sessions where we've had some really engaged individuals trying to really understand some of the basics and the nuances around procurement in these spaces. Then we look at Plant. So again, what's the mechanisms? Is it category management? Is it call-off agreements? Is it frameworks, service SLAs, whatever it needs to be? Again, what does value look like in Plant? So again, thinking specifically around air quality, thinking about logistics, thinking about data. What does that value look like? And again, who's responsible? And this is one we've had plant managers on who are responsible for procurement and plant. So it isn't just your procurement teams, it might be the plant teams as well that come on to talk about those issues. Subcontracts is very much about the best contracting arrangements. So we are not providing JCT and NEC contracting tutoring. That's not our bag, but what we do need to do is get organisations to think about how subcontracting works properly. Again, understanding the best contracting arrangements for the best outcomes. A lot of the problems we see with subcontracts are more around the issue of picking the wrong form of contract or picking the wrong conditions that don't enable the right behaviours. So we go in a lot more to how subcontracts work, how they can be built up, and then obviously what the end results of those look like. And again, what value can look like and what best practice does. The final couple of aspects then we pick up are things like performance management. So again, an increasing area at the moment that is growing for us through the school. So you're probably familiar with things like the carbon calculator. You may be familiar with some of the FIR data that we're pulling in. Data is becoming key. So when you're looking at successful implementation of procurement, ideally you want metrics in there that you want to be able to manage. The contract has to have the metrics associated with it, and if you put metrics in, how do you use that data? It's something that an organisation doesn't always think about when they're pulling their procurement activity together. So we talk about what the data looks like, setting those targets, thinking about service level agreements, thinking about how you monitor them, how you then build that into performance review. And then the final bit that's really sort of advanced at the moment is picking up supplier relationship management. So this is outside performance management. It's really interesting to see how people's perceptions are that SRM is the same as SPM. Supplier relationship management is the same as supplier performance management, isn't it? And the relationships, how we develop those, how we work closer, how we categorize our suppliers, how we create strategic relationships. So that's really very much more about that sort of preferred suppliers, that strategic supplier, working closer with a few to be able to get some of the real value propositions delivered. And again, that's an interactive workshop that we deliver. So what we can then do is What we also then did was put together some pathways for you. So when you go into the pathways element, you can enroll on a variety of sort of introduction level, intermediate level, expert level on pathways. And there's a variety of different resources that are already allocated. Now, it's important to understand that these are different from your personal action plans. Pathways are predetermined. They have a little badge at the end of it when you complete it. So you may decide that actually, if you've got a team of people you want to train, you set up, you use these pathways, or you set up your own, which you can do, for your teams to complete. And in there may be resources that are in an individual person's action plan. It sounds complicated. It's not as complicated as it sounds. An individual action plan will be stuff that's tailored to them through their training needs analysis. The pathway is a pre-described area that you give and you tell everybody to go and do. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to do a training needs analysis. You can set this off anyway. And if there's anything in the pathway that is in somebody's action plan, then it's a double tick. They do it once and it ticks both. So it's just, again, a different way that you can monitor, and you can actually set teams up to do their training within this area. So as I said, they're already in there. If you go in and have a look, you can look for the procurement pathways. They're already pre-populated, or alternatively, you can actually create your own pathways if you do decide there are certain resources that you quite like the look of. So there's a lot in there, and actually the key here is about you understanding your journey and understanding the best way to develop this, both from your own personal perspective to upskill yourself, but also using this in terms of trying to upskill teams. So when you're thinking about developing your learning journey, there's a number of things that you can have a look at. So when you have a look at upskilling people in your organisation, try not to focus specifically just on your procurement teams. Think about who's key to your procurement decisions. So that might be getting engineering in, giving them a little bit of an intro to the process. It might be getting the contract managers in, so they understand what's important when they're managing the contract. Obviously, it includes the procurement teams, it includes the buyers, it includes the category teams, it includes commercial, anybody who's involved in that procurement process. Once you've done that, you might want to then say, right, everybody's got to go and complete a procurement training needs analysis. That might be one way to go and do that. And if you are managing a team, you could put that into things like the PDRs, you could put that into their continuous improvement matrix. If you're doing it yourself, you might just decide you want to go and do that for your own personal upskilling, your own knowledge. But by completing that training needs analysis gives you that real good opportunity to think about how you focus your resources on areas that you need to improve rather than a generic training course. You then might, if you've got a team in front of you and you're setting it, you might want to set a target for your completion of your action plan. So build that again into things like your PDRs. So we've worked with some of the partners in the school on this with their teams, and the way they've done it is exactly this. They've created the plan, they've decided who needs to go on the training, they've set them targets for completion, and that's been tied into things like the personal development plans. And at the end of the year, they've gone away and been able to successfully evidence that they've completed it or not, as the case may be. So it may be that you develop this yourself. It could be that you work with a learning development team. If you're an SME, you are probably the learning development team and the person who's undertaking the training. But it doesn't matter. It's about setting that action plan and determining how you want to progress going forward. I've gone through all the workshops that we've got. So there may be, when you do the training needs analysis, it won't necessarily recommend workshops. So think about any additional workshops that you want to be able to run on. I'm going to give you some dates in a moment that show you the ones that we're going to be running for the next 4 or 5 months, and then there'll be another set after that. And whether there are any additional learning resources. And if you come across anything that you're doing in your own personal learning and you think the school should offer, then please, feel free to contact us. If it's a useful resource, we will make sure it's out there. If you decide that the action plan isn't just the only way, but you want to put together learning pathways and also think about the e-learning, it may be that you want everybody to do an intro, regardless of whether the training thinks they need to do it or not. So again, we've had some partners working on it who said, look, I don't want anyone to not miss anything. So we'll get everybody to go on a plant one because we need them all to understand plant, or we need them all to understand materials. So think about the sort of modules that could be useful. And then set up your learning pathway and launch that with your procurement teams. You can either use the existing ones to have a look at what's in them, or decide that you've identified resources, you've identified workshops, you've identified e-learning modules, set those up and launch them to your team. Once they've completed action plans, so the training needs analysis, once they've completed that, get everybody to reassess. And again, you can use the data in the school to determine how the schools have improved. So again, individuals can show even the slightest of improvement and level of understanding. And the beauty is that at the end of things like action plans and learning pathways, there's scores, there's badges, there's lots of recognition. If we've got procurement people on the call who are part of SIPs, then anything you do that has CPD hours can be used to log CPD hours against your SIPs qualifications as well. So there's a beauty of recognition in all of that. And then hopefully we start to get a bit more of an understanding. As I said, there are workshops that we are now running. So we've been running them through a series. So you've got an opportunity in May, June, 2 in June, 1 in July, 1 in September. And as you see, we've done it in terms of, we start off with the basics and move up to the mature areas of procurement processing. And we've run this tranche, I think, twice now. And we've had people who've literally been with us at the beginning of the journey and then gone through the whole of the training initiatives as they've gone through. So have a think about that in terms of what you'd want yourselves and maybe your teams to do. And those dates will be on the slides and are available for registration now. Okay, so I said about 40 minutes, so I managed to do that, which is good. So I think what I wanted you to get a good idea of is the resources are available. There's a huge range that we cover, and with procurement being so fundamentally key to everything that we do, it's really important that we get slick at it, that we get good at it, that we understand how to be able to manage and navigate some of these challenges. The resources are there, they are free, they're available for you to use. And they will at least provide you some small little acorns and little nutmegs of things to go away and have a look at that will allow you to start thinking about how you can start to navigate what at the moment is a really challenging time for procurement, so that at the tail end of it, when we come out, that we've got a really good opportunity to just be slicker and better at the way that we do a lot of these issues. So as we do with all of these things, we have got a feedback that we will send around to everybody. And I know Jenny, I think, usually does this at the end of the webinar as well. So when you finish off the webinar, close it down, you'll get the feedback form. But from my perspective, I suppose, are there any questions? You're all very quiet today. So it's Friday, isn't it? Looking forward to your weekend. Any questions? Nothing at the moment. You've all gone very, very quiet. Oh, no for now. Thank you. Thank you. It's nice to say somebody, no, I have no questions, which is always nice. Otherwise I sit there looking like this, a bit confused. In which case, it's been a pleasure talking to myself and to you. Have a lovely long weekend. Enjoy the bank holiday. I think we are due to have some nice weather. So sit back, relax, think a little bit, hopefully, and feel free to go away and have a look at all the courses that we've got available. Rosanna, yes, we do. You get the slides, and I will make sure that they're all sent round. So in the meantime, pleasure as always. Have fun, everybody. Enjoy your weekend. Thank you very much. And I might see some of you on the workshops. Take care.